Hi, everyone, and welcome from Raleigh, North Carolina. I just wanted to thank those of you that joined a few weeks ago, and I got great comments, texts, connections for those that were interested in the shipbuilding concept and wanted to hear more. So I'm thrilled to be here today to share that with you. I think it was about 18 years ago, maybe almost 19. I remember that day distinctly because I was driving into the office and I had a pit in my stomach. And I knew that something was off, something just wasn't right. And what was happening to me at that time is I was completely overworked, overwhelmed. My relationship with my boss was kind of on the rocks. And actually, the relationship with my husband was as well. And it was that day that when I went into the office, I had no idea that that was going to be my last day in my corporate world. My boss at that time kind of picked the wrong day to tell me to shut up and sit down. And it was that day that I left and I never went back. And when I think about my life journey and all that I've been through, my experiences, I want you to be thinking about your past, your experiences, your life journey. But I want you to be thinking about the relationships that you've had, those that impacted you in some way. And I want to share with you what I've learned about shipbuilding, which is a concept that I teach and I train and I write an awful lot about these days. And I want to share with you some stories that hopefully will encourage and inspire you to be focused and be intentional on working on the ships, the relationships, and the partnerships that are most important to you. That's what we're going to cover in the next hour or so. I want this to be interactive. I would love to hear your stories. So we're going to make sure that the chat box is open. When I think about driving home that day after I walked out and said, I'm out of here, I remember feeling really excited. I was free. I felt like I was free to be me. I just needed to figure out who me was. And it was that point when I started thinking about those relationships that mattered most to me. And I thought, gosh, my husband, my boss, those seemingly should have been the two most important relationships to my happiness and my success, but they both weren't strong at all. Actually, shortly after leaving corporate America, I left my husband after 20 years of marriage. So there I was, no job, no husband, trying to figure out who am I? What am I supposed to be doing the rest of my life? I had two girls, 9 and 11, and they needed their mom. That relationship wasn't the way that it should have been. I was working, and traveling all the time. They needed their mom, and I wasn't there for them. So when I made this change, I really shook things up. Now, I'm not at all sitting here today saying quit your job, leave your, leave your marriage or anything like that. What I want you to realize today is that there is no need to go through life alone. And we need to work on those relationships that are important to us. After leaving corporate America, I'm going to share my screen if that's all right with you, Joel. And I want to share some slides that will help tell my story. After leaving corporate America, I finally got my book published and I started my own business. And my company is K Coaching. The book is Race to Amazing, Your Fast Track to Sales Leadership. That's my background, my history. But what I wanted to do is to put everything that I learned over all those years and the relationships that I had with my employees, my boss, my family, and put them all into one book. Now, HubSpot has recognized it as one of the top 17 best sales management books every sales manager should read. But the favorite chapter that I often hear about is the shipbuilding chapter, and that's chapter 12. I also want to make sure that you're aware that you can download this chapter for free, and I'll give you some instruction on that towards the end. But the shipbuilding chapter really resonated with a lot of my followers, and That's why I like to turn it into workshops and retreats and share that with you today. The truth is, 45% of all first marriages and 60%, which is a big number, of all second marriages end in divorce. Imagine that. That is the relationship that we go into fully committed on day one, and then something breaks down, something happens, it doesn't work out. 57% of employees quit their job because of their manager. And you might be sitting there thinking, yeah, I remember quitting my job once, and it was because of my manager. So think of those truths for a moment. And if you've experienced a divorce or a blended family or leaving or quitting a job, the truth is most of us have. But I want you to be thinking about, if you wanted that to be successful, what could you have done better or different to build that relationship and that partnership? Today, I'd like you to write down and also share with us in chat 3 of the most important relationships or partnerships that, let's say, are important to you for your success and for your happiness. What are those? And then as I walk through the 5 concepts of building strong ships, you can be thinking back on the 3 that you've written down. So go ahead and think about that today. What are the top 3 most important relationships or partnerships to your happiness and your success? And you can start sharing them with us. You know, I taught the shipbuilding concept hundreds and hundreds of times, but it's so important to share where I even got this idea in the first place. So when I started my own business, I was a coaching and consulting organization. And like I said, that was about 18 years ago. And one of my first clients was a sales leader, and he hired me to help him be a better sales leader. He didn't have good relationships with his employees. As a matter of fact, they didn't even want to take him out on sales calls because he just talked too much and would kind of take over the meeting. So he hired me to help him build his relationships with his customers and help him close more deals, as well as his relationships with his employees. And the story goes, finally, Jim, for the sake of the story, went to call on his first client practicing shipbuilding techniques. And for the sake of the story, let's call him Grumpy, the client. And I know Grumpy, so I was like nervous he was going to be using Grumpy as his kind of little test case. So he went to go on a sales call with his sales rep, and it went famously. The sales rep is sitting there asking Grumpy these wonderful open-ended questions, and they're building a relationship. And Jim is sitting in the chair beside his sales rep, looking at Grumpy, and Grumpy's smiling and talking to the sales rep. And my client's thinking, gee, I don't know why anybody called him Grumpy. He seems like a very nice man. And they're getting along wonderful because he wasn't taking over the sales call. Jim was just sitting there listening and smiling and looking at Grumpy and letting the sales rep manage it. It was at that point that Grumpy turned to Jim and said, so what do you do? And Jim was like, oh. And Grumpy's like, well, what do you do? And he didn't know what to say. And he's looking at Grumpy, and behind Grumpy on the wall is this big picture, and it's a ship. And Grumpy is standing in front of the ship, and he's grinning ear to ear, and his arms are out, and he has these fish, these huge fish that are all the way to the ground. And he's in front of this big ship, kind of similar to what I have behind me. And Jim's just kind of like looking at Grumpy, and he's like, so what do you do? And Jim said, I build ships. What do you mean you build ships? He said, I build partnerships and I build relationships. And it was at that point that Grumpy and Jim started building their ship together. And they got to the car, and Jim calls me. He's like, you're not going to believe how this went. And he started telling me about shipbuilding. And I said, do you mind if I take this and run with it? I love the concept. So I went a little crazy. I started studying it and looking at my past relationships and what makes relationships and partnerships strong, what makes them break down. And I interviewed thousands of people on the concept. Do you realize there's over 500 words that start with ship or that have ship in it? And often they're positive and they're building something. Citizenship, stewardship, relationships, leadership. Think of all the words with the word ship in. Now, I want you to think about, again, those three most important relationships and partnerships to you as I walk through some of these concepts. So let me just check out the chat box and let's see what people are saying. What are some of the relationships that are important to them? Partner, family, friends, students, clients. Absolutely. And it is difficult to pick three. And for our activity today, that's the beauty of it. I want you to concentrate on one, two, or three. Maybe mix it up a little bit. Have one family, maybe one be more of a work relationship, because I want you to think about each of these concepts specifically with those relationships, because it will teach you to take this idea and apply it to all the other relationships in your life and what's important there. God, family, friends, perfect. I love that. All right, you ready to go? Let's start building those ships together. So ship 1 and 2, I like to put them on the same screen because they're similar in that the key word is what I refer to as understanding. So first off, understanding, you want to understand the other person's wants, their needs, their circumstance. By understanding, then you can understand yourself and understand concept number 2, which is what is your role? What is your purpose? What is the value that you bring to that relationship? So for understanding, it's really setting back, maybe asking questions, listening, being empathetic to what it is that is going on in their world, whether it's a work relationship or a personal relationship. What are their wants? What are their needs? And then what do they want and need from you and the relationship that you have? Are you a friend, a sibling, a grandchild, a grandparent, a partner? Are you the manager? Are you the planner? Understanding your role and their role and the purpose that you each play in the relationship is really critical. What are the wants and needs and circumstances of the other person? And that's a little unselfish, right? That's part of building. It's really having a relationship where you're understanding. Now, when I think about one of the most important relationships in my entire life that was meaningful to me as I was growing up as a child and also as I kind of had the courage and the confidence to start my own business is my relationship with my grandmother. And I teach and talk a lot about Grandma Betty because she was the wisest woman in the whole world. So Grandma Betty lived at the end of Shady Lane in a small coal mining town in Pennsylvania. And I was the oldest granddaughter. So I really felt special. Now, what else made me feel very special is we shared a birthday. So I was born on her birthday. And when it was our birthday, I always liked to do something just she and I alone. And even when I was a little girl, we always like went for ice cream or just had our alone time. And she's like an amazing woman. Unfortunately, she's no longer with us, but she was such an important influence in my life that I love sharing Grandma Betty's stories. She actually told me when I quit corporate America, she said, Christy, I don't know why you just don't put your name on a business card and go sell yourself. That's how wise Grandma Betty was. I remember wanting to work on our relationship intentionally, and it was her 80th birthday. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we've got to do something special for Grandma Betty for her 80th, right? And I asked all my family, what do you think about Grandma Betty going to a spa? And they're like, she doesn't leave the kitchen. You know, she's not going to go anywhere. She doesn't leave Grandpa. And I'm thinking, she doesn't. She never goes anywhere on her own. And she always takes care of everybody else. And my fondest memory is going into Grandma Betty's kitchen. I always knew she'd be right there at the kitchen table ready to serve up coffee or desserts. And that's where we gathered as a family. And I thought, I'm going to ask her. So I asked, and she said yes. And everybody couldn't believe it. Grandma Betty was going to the spa. So I drove to her home. I remember that day I walked in the front door and I'm so excited to take her to the spa just for one night. And it wasn't too far away. And Papa was standing in the kitchen. He was all by himself. I'm like, Papa, where's Grandma? She's always here. She's always in the kitchen. I said, is she ready? He said, well, she's been ready for days. And I turned around and I see Grandma Betty walking down the stairs, pink dress, pink hat, pink shoes, pink purse. She's going to the spa. Oh, what a wonderful vision and memory. So needless to say, Grandma Betty and I had a great time at the spa. Now I remember sitting out after dinner, we're on this little deck and we had a log cabin and she's smoking her cigarettes and I was having a cigar and we're sitting there talking. And I said, Grandma, I asked everybody if they thought that you would want to come. And they all said that you wouldn't come. They said that you would say no. And she said, well, no one ever asked. How would they know? And I thought, gosh, that's a beautiful story. I asked, what if I wouldn't have asked? I couldn't be sharing this story with you today. One of the fondest memories that I've had in my lifetime, and I'm sure in hers. So understand the other person. Don't just make assumptions and really understand what your role is. I was her oldest granddaughter. She was my grandmother. I had a commitment to that. Make no assumptions, just ask. That's shipbuilding lesson number 1 and number 2. Now, this is Grandma Betty. This picture is actually at the spa. Years and years ago, I have this one picture, and here it is of Grandma Betty. And I get to share that with you today because I asked. Shipbuilding number 3. This is called reciprocity. Kind of a big word, but let's think about this. Reciprocity is giving and taking. It's that mutual understanding and effort. I like to think of it as putting a deposit in more than you withdraw. Think about one of those relationships that you wrote down. Is there reciprocity? Now, sometimes we're in a relationship with, I call them takers. Take, but not giving. So reciprocity is giving and taking. I remember Grandma Betty saying to me one time, Christy, there's givers and takers out there. You're either one or the other. And I would go through life, giver, taker, giver, taker. I mean, that's really a distorted way to look at people. But I can actually say that I think one of my daughters is a giver and one's a taker. I don't know how they develop that way. But I want you to say that in a relationship, are you the giver? Are you the taker? Are you both givers and takers? One of the best examples I can use of reciprocity, and you probably all can relate to this in some way, shape, or form. I since I left my husband after I quit my corporate job years ago, I have remarried, and I have a blended family. My stepdaughter didn't accept me as freely and openly as I wished that she would have, and I couldn't understand that. And what I determined early on in my shipbuilding efforts with her is that I needed to deposit more than I withdrew. So I was giving without expecting anything in return. And then I could withdraw some things from her. Today, I believe we have a wonderful relationship. It took a lot of work, but it was an important relationship to focus and to work on and use some of these shipbuilding techniques because we were a blended family. It impacted lots of people, my husband, my children, our family as a unit, her mother. So think about how important reciprocity is. And don't be sitting there saying, well, I'm the taker or I'm the giver. There are times in that relationship that you might need to be the giver until you can actually withdraw from it. Mutual understanding and mutual effort. This often comes up in partnerships, like when you have a vendor relationship. Sometimes you might be seen as, well, I'm the vendor, you're the customer. And sometimes the customer is always right and the customer is always taking, but it shouldn't be that way. Now, if you're thinking about a partnership or maybe a work relationship or a business relationship, what can you do with step number one and number two to understand your role, ask questions, understand their wants and needs so that you can elevate shipbuilding number three, which is reciprocity. The next one, shipbuilding number four. This one I call executing with care, trust, and integrity. Now, in my book and in many of my prior speeches, I would always talk about care, trust, and integrity. Just recently, I added kindness and love. And the reason I added kindness and love is I thought everybody knew this, that if you're going to have a successful relationship and partnership, that you have to execute with kindness and love. But I felt like I needed to reiterate that. Now think about executing, that's the key word. If you're in a relationship or a partnership, it can't just be stagnant. You have to be doing something. So think about executing as maybe you have common goals or a common purpose. And that's well understood. And now it's time to do something about that, work towards those goals. I'll give you an example. So executing with care, trust, and integrity. Let's take Papa and Grandma again. They had a wonderful marriage. They could teach us a lot about this. They were married on their, I guess, it was probably 68 years they were married. Actually, when I got married the second time, my grandmother unfortunately wasn't alive, and neither was my father, who was extremely important to me. So I asked my grandfather if he would walk me down the aisle. He didn't understand that, like, what are you asking me for? Ask your brother. And I'm like, no, you're my grandfather and you mean a lot to me. Well, get this. I got married on his would-be 70th wedding anniversary. And he got to walk me down the aisle. First time he's ever walked anyone down the aisle because he has 3 sons. And he had a tuxedo on. He was a farmer. He never wore a tuxedo. So here I got to execute my relationship with him with care, trust, love, kindness. We had a moment, and that was intentional. That's one way to be thinking about execution. It could be simple as doing something together. Now, I would imagine if you have your partner or your spouse down as one of those key relationships, execution might be, well, we have a goal, we have a plan of retirement together. Well, what does that look like? How are you doing that together? These are kind of soft words, but when you're executing in a work relationship, it still needs to be done with trust, care, and integrity. There's a term that I often use in business called strategic passion. And I want to talk about that just for a moment, especially if you had some relationships that were work related in your list of top 3. Think about this for a moment. When you're executing a business plan, a contract, an agreement, if you're executing it with strategy and passion, it's really going to take off. It's really going to soar. So let's just think passion, we have passionate ideas, we have passion around something, but if you put strategy and attach it to that passion, then things really take off. Passion alone without strategy is just passion. Strategy and ideas alone without that passion is just strategy. It doesn't take off. Those two things together are beautiful. So when we're talking about building ships, if you have a strategic relationship and it's more business, how can you add passion into that with that particular individual? And vice versa. If you have a passionate relationship, how can you really attach more strategy, goals, planning? And that's when those two things combined really rock and roll. So I want you to think about strategic passion when it comes to your relationships and partnerships. Shipbuilding number 5, and this is one of our last concepts, is exceeding expectations. This is the most difficult of all shipbuilding concepts because it's like, I'm giving it all I got, but people keep expecting more. If you're constantly looking for ways to exceed someone's expectations, that's when amazing things happen. Now, I'm a grandmother now, so I have these expectations of like my relationship with my grandmother. Well, gosh, this poor little girl is going to be spoiled the rest of her life. I'm Kika, and I am going to be the best grandmother on the face of this earth, right? And I'm going to be exceeding the expectations of what a grandmother should be. What relationships do you have that you can start thinking about, what can I do to exceed what the other person expects? You know, it's constant work, right? But let's make it fun work. I'd like you to think about exceeding expectations, but this is a little overboard, okay? This is Kika on Halloween. What, I don't know why I thought this was a good grandma shark mask, but it's actually quite scary. But I'm going above and beyond, right? Being and exceeding my role. Here's Eddie and I. I mean, this is taking her on a parade, and we're now dressed up as Lady Liberty and Uncle Sam. So you don't have to go overboard, but at least exceed some of those expectations. I want to share with you a personal story for a moment as well, as you're developing your action items on what you're going to do to build those relationships that matter most. Remember, shipbuilding is about building. Think about ships. They're built for a purpose, and they're built to last a lifetime. So when you're building your relationships and partnerships, they need to be intentional and proactive. This is my mother, my daughter, and my granddaughter. Obviously important relationships to me. My grandmother instilled a lot of values and love in me and my relationship. My mother, not so much, and I'll admit that. Our relationship was rocky at times. But sometimes she would get on my nerves, or I would feel like, oh, I need to call my mom, but I wouldn't want to. And how nice is that? Not good, right? But she was diagnosed with cancer last January, and I invited her to come to my home in a different state to go through in-home hospice. I moved my office home to care for her and to ensure that I really worked on my relationship with her the past 4 months of her life. And it was amazing. I didn't have to ask. If I wouldn't have asked, she certainly wouldn't have pushed her way in. But I asked, and I never felt anything negative about our relationship. And she shared some of the most wonderful, fondest memories in her final 4 months of life living in our home. And she got to spend them with her great-grandchild and her grandchild and her daughter. And I'm so thankful that I did that. And I wouldn't want to have had any regrets in that regard when it comes to that relationship. So this picture is really important to me. And we're all smiling, right? I love it. So let's go back to thinking about how can you use some of the concepts of shipbuilding to make your ships better, stronger, more meaningful before it's too late? What actions can you take to build those ships that matter most to your success and to your happiness? I'd like to just have maybe some Q&A on this, Joel, and also share some of the concepts, because what I've learned when we do this activity is so many people will hear something and they're like, oh my gosh, yeah, I could do that too. I'll go ahead and lead it. And if you have some that you'd like to share, Joel, as you were thinking about the different relationships that are important to you, what are some of the shipbuilding activities or concepts that you can do to continue building those ships that matter most? What are your thoughts?
So I think one of the ones that really resonates with me is the the giver-taker dynamic. And actually, I think this is one of these things. Quick story from my end of it. I retired from the University of Arizona at the end of last year, and I'm now working for Unique Venues. And it meant I was coming home and staying home because I was going to be working from home. And so we decided that we were going to build a standalone casita in the backyard that would be in my office, put in a pool, extend our patio, and landscape the yard. Now, this is a big deal for my wife and I, because for 21 years prior, our backyard was dirt. And it was dirt because we could never agree at all on what we wanted to do with the backyard. She had a vision and I had a vision, and neither one of us wanted to give at all on that particular vision. And it wasn't until we kind of had this catalyst that was forced upon us to say, all right, I'm coming home and I'm not going to work anymore. What are we going to do to solve this? So we were finally able, I think both of us, like I can recognize looking backwards over the last 9 months, even just up to a couple weeks ago, as we were finishing out the last couple pieces of landscaping. You know, she really wanted grass and I wanted artificial turf, because I know who's going to mow that lawn for the next 20 years. And we eventually reached a compromise, and I gave on a different area of the backyard with something that she wanted. And I think it's the thing that I get caught up a lot of times in my life, in whatever role it is, whether I'm at work or whether it's at home or with family members. I struggle with my parents to some extent, because I think a lot of times your first thought is just, what can I get out of this? What can I take? What's in this for me? And we forget to go into it with a sense of, what do I need to give? How do I need to open myself up to be a part of this so that I can actually receive something at the end of the day? I think the giving action is what actually opens us up to be able to receive something in return. And if we're unwilling to do that, then we just can't get away with that. And so it makes me think about some of the other places where I struggle with relationships. What can I do to give? What are some of the steps I could take? My parents right now, it's just the two of them. They're up in Phoenix. I could start taking once a month, go up for a couple days, spend a couple days doing some yard work. They're almost 80, doing some yard work, doing some shopping, doing some things, and give of my time. And in return, I would probably receive some of that experience like you had with your mom or you had with your grandmother that maybe we haven't had as much of over the years. So that would be one that kind of resonates with me as I kind of think through the concepts that you shared.
Wow. You know, that reminds me, my husband was very close to his mother. She was a single mom, raised 2 boys, and his youngest brother was killed in a car accident at 19. Very sad. And so it was him and his mother, and they were so close. And he talked to her twice a day, in the morning and at night. But after she passed, he said, you know, I wish I would have visited her more. I wish I wouldn't have been so focused on work that I couldn't just go over and sit with her in her living room and share an afternoon with her and give her that time. And, you know, nobody wants to have regrets about relationships. And that's why the shipbuilding concept is so important, because it makes us rediscover what's important in our role in terms of building that relationship. And we've had some people chatting in, talking about reciprocity and the idea of understanding your role and really understanding the other person's role and what they want and what they need, and not be so self-centered, right? Someone else was talking about work associates, acquaintances, business acquaintances becoming more friends than just business acquaintances. That is so important. And that's what happens, actually. That's what makes that relationship strong in the end, because you worked on it, you built on it. It brings to mind, I've had thousands and thousands of business partnerships and relationships over the years since we've had our own company. But I am friends with my clients. I mean, I can't, wait to see them again. And we're no longer doing business together, but we're friends. And that's important.
We have someone, Linda just asked a question about, can you speak to situations where you're the giver and this is kind of a set family dynamic and you don't get anything in response? Is there a point where you kind of you give it, you have to accept that you can't control what you're going to get back? And, how do you just deal with that from a kind of a mental health standpoint?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the concepts with shipbuilding is that, you do that deposit, deposit, deposit before you withdraw. But if you're giving it all you got and you're not getting anything from the other end, or if you're in a relationship, it doesn't matter what it is, that is toxic or that is not serving you, then that's a whole different dynamic, right? Where you actually say, I am gonna put a little bit of wall around my ship. You're not gonna get in, or I'm not gonna be sharing as much of my time with you, or I'm not gonna continue to work on this because it's not serving you. So also be thinking about that as well. This does not mean that just because you're related or that you have to be building your ship all the time. This is deciding. It's making choices. And if there is a relationship that is toxic, is not serving you, then you might have to let that go. I let go of my boss's relationship when I quit corporate America, but it was toxic. He had an anger management problem, and I was not at my best when I was in the room with him. And same with my first husband. Unfortunately, our marriage, didn't survive. However, I often think, well, what if I would have done more shipbuilding? Did I really give it everything that it deserved? And so those are questions that you need to ask yourself. But from a health standpoint, I think that we need to put ourselves first in any of these relationships.
Seeing if anyone else has got one, you can go ahead and chime it out there. One other one that again I can share is really trying to understand the other person, like where they're coming from, what they're doing. When I finished out my career, I was kind of at a senior level administrative role, and my boss was a senior vice president, very important, busy woman, incredible leader, big visionary person. But also we have very different styles. And I wasn't sure I wanted to go work for her originally because I wasn't sure that we would mesh very well. And we spent the first 12 months together really trying to understand one another. And I was grateful that she was as willing to do that as I was, because we did butt heads quite a few times originally. And I think over time we made each other better, because as I understood where she was coming from, I mean, she used to say, Joel, you lead with no all the time. And I'm not really leading with no, but I'm an operations thinker. So I'm like, well, here's all the things we got to think about with this great idea you just had. And she's like, I have a great idea. Let's implement it. And let's not worry about the details. And that took us a while to figure out how to respect where both of us were coming from. And she made me better in terms of letting go of some of the nitty gritty and thinking through the vision and the possibility. And I made her better in thinking, wait a second, I do have to remember that there will be people that are affected by whatever grand vision and idea that I have. Yeah. And what I'll say is that the one person that probably I keep in touch with most since I've retired is her. And 5 years ago, I never would have said that that would be the case, but it's because we really came to truly understand one another. So again, I think your key points here definitely are spot on with the way in which you build relationships with people that maybe you don't even have something in common with to start with.
Yes. And, it reminds me of something. We find this quite frequently within organizations and teams where we'll have a shipbuilding workshop and almost like facilitate that understanding. There's some homework here, we get together, we have an open dialogue conversation. I'm like a mediator almost, and just really creating these shipbuilding components within a working relationship. And understanding is so important, just like you described. Just understanding where they're coming from, what their strengths are, why are they thinking the way that they're thinking, and communications is the key. Someone added a comment here that I just love. You can't tug someone else if your own ship isn't floating. And I also have these fun activities at shipbuilding workshops where we actually have these crafts and we're building our ship. What do we want our ship to look like? When I was studying shipbuilding, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we're a ship. We're mostly water. And I'm thinking, it's our decision and our choices to sail or to or to sit still or to not take off or to soar. And we're our own ship and we have to take care of that. You're right. That's a great comment. So that actually lends itself nicely to some next thoughts about self-care and self-expectations. Think of yourself as a ship. Today, what does your ship look like? And what do you want it to look like? What's the vision for you? Do you want to be like the Titanic? I have many clients and friends that, they just, it's size that matters, right? I want to be big and powerful and I'm not going to really pay attention to anybody else. As a matter of fact, I don't have enough life jackets on my ship for anybody else. But look what happens. Size doesn't matter, right? The Titanic sunk. Maybe you are that tugboat, and you feel like you're pulling people along, but they're not giving, they're not helping, but you're the tugboat in that. Is that what your ship looks like? Or maybe you want your ship to be a big, beautiful yacht. It might be what the exterior looks like. Not so much, it's more about glamour and it's not really real. Maybe you're a speedboat. You're going through life 100 miles an hour, going from point A to point B, not smelling the roses, not paying attention to anybody beside you or around you. Are you a speedboat? So I want you to think about what your ship looks like and what do you want it to look like? When I think about what do I want my ship to look like, and in our workshops, we like craft things and we make them. But one thing that I always vision when I think of what do I want my ship to look like? It's a wooden plank. It's a wooden plank out in the middle of the ocean, and the waves are high and the wind is frailing, and I'm balancing myself, almost surfing on this plank because I'm steadfast and I'm purposeful and intentional, and my relationships and my partnerships are strong, and it makes me strong that no matter what comes my way, I'm able to stay on board. But what do you want your ship to look like? What does it look like now? And what are the things that you can do? Keep in mind, when you work on building, you're actually building your own ship. So those are good visuals for us to think about. I wanted to also leave some time for any Q&A. And I want to make sure that you also realize you can find out more about shipbuilding by going to KristaMoore.net. We have shipbuilding conferences, workshops, small teams. I do shipbuilding retreats, and we actually take the time to concentrate on this concept intimately, vulnerably, and really work on those relationships that matter most. This is an example of one of our shipbuilding retreats, out to dinner. So follow me socially and get connected. And you can also go to KristaMoore.net and download chapter 12 of the Race to Amazing book. And you can read all about shipbuilding in a different way. Follow me on YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook. I do a lot of shipbuilding activities there as well. I have the Krista Moore talk show every Wednesday at 2 o'clock, and I'm interviewing people from all over the world and sharing stories of purpose and passion and meaning in relationships and partnerships. So hopefully you'll join me for one of those.
That's great, Krista.
Anything you want to add?
No, well, I was going to ask if there are any questions for Krista about anything related to shipbuilding, please feel free to throw it in chat or throw it in the Q&A box, and because we've got a little bit of time here. I don't know if, Krista, you saw my comment just a second ago. I was so caught up in your presentation, I totally forgot to launch the poll halfway through like I was supposed to. So shame on me. So that's out there right now, and hopefully people are taking just a few minutes to respond to it, so that we can continue to gauge kind of how people are feeling about what's going on right now in the meetings and events industry. I think this really resonates with me, and I'm hoping it resonates with a lot of people, just thinking through, especially in a time like right now, how important it is to lean on the ships the relationships, the partnerships that you have with everyone around you. Like, we could not be successful getting through something like this if we didn't have good family and friends and personal relationships out there that we could bank on. And maybe even more importantly, as we start to, emerge from this and reestablish meetings and events and all that, our strong partnerships with the vendors and the businesses and those. So I guess my question would be, what are some suggestions for people to think about? Maybe they haven't talked to that vendor in a while, or maybe because they've been just shut down or they've been focused on their own thing. How do you kind of come back out of a period of silence or distance? What can you do to jumpstart some of those relationships with your business colleagues and partners?
That's a great question. We're hearing a lot from parents whose children maybe have moved back in with them with COVID. And I do some teaching in universities, and I had this group of student leaders, and a lot of them weren't in the dorm, they were at home. And they were talking about things that they could do to maybe cook a meal for the family, instead of expecting mom to be doing it all the time. So really think about little small things are building and can make a significant difference. Even if you said, I'm going to make a list of 10 vendors that I haven't spoken with in the past 5 months, but that are really important to me. And tomorrow I'm going to call them, not text them, not email. I'm going to pick up the phone and call them. And I'm just going to thank them and show gratitude for the relationship and see how they're doing. Begin to understand what their wants and their needs are and what's going on with them. So that's an intentional shipbuilding activity right there.
That's great. I appreciate the consideration that goes into thinking about what we do to just check in on people. I think we've been trying to do that a lot from a unique venues perspective. It's interesting times because, of course, it seems like you call someone with the number you have on file and no one's working from their office at the moment, so you get that voicemail. But even leaving that voicemail and knowing that they're going to get it, hopefully is a little bit of a spark of a human connection that makes them feel good on that particular day and time. Yeah. So looking for, someone else just noticed that they've been mailing handwritten cards to people that they do business with during that. That's a great way to really show that you're invested in them.
That's wonderful. I have a handwritten thank you card from a boss from, 30 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, it means I think I'm sure I have a few in my files as well from when I walked away from the university, of things that I kept over the year that made a difference. Again, the e-cards are great and all that, but that handwritten note really says someone was thinking about you and took time to sit down and pen a little note. So that's great.
Wow. I'm recalling something too. I remember I had a terrific boss once that he just was always working on building relationships with his employees. And one of the things that he did that was really different was we had like an internal voicemail system. He would leave a message and just say, it's Mother's Day this weekend. I just want you to take the time and be with your family and just know how much we appreciate you, being a working mom. And I mean, he didn't have to leave that message, but it was building, it was nurturing, it was executing our relationship in a meaningful way. And it made a difference.
I'm sure that it did. So I'm going to launch the session evaluation for those of you that responded to everyone's going to get a follow-up email within the next couple of days that will have the results of the poll. But if you can take just a minute, fill out the session evaluation. We always value that feedback as well. Just quick 2 questions. We still have a little bit of time. So if anyone has a question for Krista that they'd like answered about the shipbuilding concert, go ahead and throw it in chat or in the Q&A, and we can do that. And again, as you're coming up on some holiday seasons, it's the perfect opportunity, I think, to really sit down and look at the 6 elements and say to yourself, what are the things I'm going to do as I go see family during this, or don't go see family during this, and work with them to help them be okay with that. And, you know, the different things that are going to strain our relationships in the coming months or challenge them. These are great ways to think through what are the ways that I can invest in this. This was recorded, so that we are definitely going to have it available on our uniquevenues.com/resources page within 24 hours. So it will be out there for anyone that wants to rewatch it, or if you want to share it with others on your team or your family. I mean, it's a public site, so anybody can come in and take a look at the programming that we've been putting up so far this year during everything that's going on. And just kind of looking at, Krista, I'm not sure if we've seen any more questions.
No, we have some confirmation that I love what Lee says about relationships are like plants. If we don't feed and water them, nourish them, and provide them plenty of sunshine, they'll wither and die. And that's a great analogy.
Yeah. Yep.
Absolutely.
Well, any last thoughts for us then? If not, but get any wrap up thoughts for us, and if then we'll turn everyone loose for the day.
Yeah, I think the only thing I want to say, and it almost goes without saying, with everyone's circumstance today, we're all dealing with the pandemic and COVID, and that has significantly impacted many relationships, positive or negative. And not being in person has made a difference and affected them in some way. So even now, more than ever, the shipbuilding concept really is applicable. And it doesn't take much, you know, it really doesn't take much, but just a little bit of effort and thinking through, what can I do? If I want things to change, how can I change? What can I do better or different to keep building those relationships and partnerships that are really important to you? So good.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Oh, you know what, Joel? I'm doing that word of the year in December. Yeah. So you might want to let them know.
Yep. So that's a perfect segue. So I'll do the wrap up here with everyone. Again, thank you, Krista, for your time today. If you enjoyed the session with Krista, and it looks from the evaluations that everybody did, she's got another session coming up for us on December 8th at 2 p.m. Eastern, called Your Word of the Year. Do you want to give us a quick teaser as to what that's about?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, so many of us set resolutions, and then we find ourselves in February, March, forgetting what those resolutions even were. So I've discovered a concept called the Word of the Year, and there's a way to create that one word that you can embody and live throughout the year to help you meet your goals for the upcoming year. So I look forward to sharing it with you, and by the end of the seminar, you will all have that one word that we can live by.
Fantastic. Well, just so everyone knows, we've got some other stuff out there as well. Member group therapy and planner roundtables are both this Thursday. I get to do that back to back. So I'm excited to see some of our members or hang out with some of our planners and see how things are going in your world. For those of you that may have overnight accommodations, we're having a panel discussion on December 1 at 2 p.m. about intern housing, which, if you've never thought of it as kind of a non-group revenue generating option, join us for a conversation with some of our members that are doing intern housing now and have actually continued to do it during the pandemic in a way that has been successful. On Thursday the 3rd, kind of leading into Krista's session, this will be great. Chuck's going to do a session on marketing New Year's resolutions. So what are your resolutions for the new year and approaching marketing your venue? And then finally, open to everyone, capped at 500. That'd be great if we actually capped out at 500. We're going to do a big end of year celebration, just a chance to hang out together. It's going to be a Zoom meeting. So everybody's box is going to be on the screen, and we're going to do some breakouts and some other fun things just to engage and celebrate the fact that we have just about, knock on wood, survived 2020, and to all start to get excited about the holiday season and going into 2021 and hopefully having it be a very different year. So again, I just want to thank you, Krista, for your time today. We really appreciate it. And thank you everybody that attended. We hope you have a great rest of your late morning or early afternoon, and we will see you on a future Unique Venues webinar. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.